Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Research America Alliance discussion. It's a special one. I'm so excited. Um, I'm Ellie Dehoney, and I'd like you to thank you today for joining us, and more generally for your partnership with Research America. Um, it's every single person, every single organization is so valuable to the work we do, adds so much impact. So if your organization is not a member, shoot me an email if you wouldn't mind putting my email and Joel's email. Joel is our development team into the chat. Get in touch with us and we'll talk more about membership. Before we start the discussion, just a bit of housekeeping. I think that the way we're doing this is questions in the chat, or is that right, Jacqueline? In the chat, or
yes,
in
the chat or
both?
Q&A box. Yep.
Okay, perfect. And we'll also certainly can unmute you to ask a question when we get to that portion of the conversation. So today we are joined by two, nationally, globally recognized advocacy experts. Bill Novelli, who said, don't talk too much about me. So I'm going to listen to him and not do that. But I will say that Bill founded Business for Impact at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. He co-founded the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. He's the author of a wonderful book. I'm not doing a marketing thing. I'm telling you the truth because I own a copy and I also own the audiobook. It's called Good Business: The Talk, Fight, Win Way to Change the World. Joining Bill is our very own Mary Woolley, President and CEO of Research America. And again, her distinctions are, crime and punishment length. So I won't go into those, but Mary and Bill, we have gathered you together today to help us understand some of the tricks of the trade in being a champion for causes, and kind of the why, the what, and the how. So let's get started with the basic question: why advocate? And Bill, perhaps I'll start with you.
Well, first, Ellie, I want to thank you for that introduction. I thought you were going to say that advocacy was like crime and punishment. So the question is, why advocate? And the answer is to win our cause. And what we have to do really is turn legislation or regulation or some other rulemaking action into action that favors us. It favors our coalition or our movement's goals. And it's important to note that policy, public policy at a national and state or community level can also influence private sector policies. An example might be employees' rights or smoking. And let's not forget legal strategies. So bringing action against another party, a lawsuit, an amicus brief, whatever it may take. And if we're going to affect change, we need to do it at two levels, I think, Ellie. One is at the macro level. So broad national strategies to really affect national norms. And the fastest way to accomplish that is policy. And at the same time, we have to work at the interpersonal level, the grassroots level, community, family, individuals. And that grassroots influences policy. Policymakers know how to count votes. So that's what I think we're talking about.
And Bill, when you say policy, you're talking about legislation, regulations, and are you talking at the federal level, state, local level, just wherever there is or town council level?
That's right. Exactly so.
Okay. And then the other is garnering more grassroots advocates, basically, or having conversations with the public that informs policy?
That informs policy because policymakers care. But at the same time, we're trying to change attitudes and behaviors at the local level.
To bring about a broader change across society.
That's right.
So Mary, how would you answer the same question?
Well, if you think I can do better than Bill, you would be quite wrong.
Of course you can.
No, this is not a contest. long been partners, but I would add that if you, anyone who's of us or anyone who's listening, or your organization depends in any way on the public in terms of policies that are there that you want to change or new ones, or for funding, then I would argue that it's your responsibility to be an advocate, to make the case for what you're doing to serve the public's interest. And I think that's at the heart and soul of what advocacy's challenge is, how to make that case, make it effectively, and to engage each and every one of us. There's campaigns, that are very structured and have to be sensitive to change over time. And then there's individual things that we can do all the time. And Bill outlined both of those. He talked about broad national strategies, and sometimes that's the campaign, the advocacy campaign that moves that. And then there's the interpersonal, one-on-one, grassroots activity it's available every day to every single one of us. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. Although you can also learn some tips and to-dos and what not to do through those who spend a lot of time in doing just that, like Bill,
Absolutely.
like you.
Well, starting with kind of the campaign notion where we work together, organizations, individuals work together. I'm really interested in your candid, not that I need to say that, I know both of you, but your perspectives on, what are a couple of key tips there, things that work, and then a couple of, from your experience, well-intentioned strategies that actually tend to tank a good campaign. So Mary, do you mind if I start with you this time, since I started with Bill last time?
I know because I've read Bill's book too. I had a lot of examples here, but I would just say at the big 30,000 foot level, campaigns that work have been well planned. Talk about campaigns, not one-on-one,
right?
What you can do every day. They've been well planned. They are well led. They've got a clear goal, and people who are involved, more all the time, speak with one voice. So and it's pretty easy to just flip that, and those things that don't work, arguments that either pass each other in the night or outright conflict, and I've watched that not work, or things that are not well planned, not well led, not well coordinated. And sometimes that involves, that kind of activity, coordinated, planned, all that is backroom stuff. You don't see it out front, but boy, is it important.
Yeah. Learning
as you go, incorporating new messaging as you learn from initial conversation, shall we say. And there's a lot of different moving parts typically in a worthwhile, wonderful campaign, but it can come out of the head of a single individual, like, is her name Candace Leiter, that marches against drunk driving. An individual can be the spark that starts something, or it could be a group, but ultimately I think some of those key principles always hold. So many examples. So tell us.
Absolutely. How about you, Bill?
Well, I think Mary's absolutely right, but just to try to add a few thoughts. We almost always need to work in coalitions, and that's not easy to do. I remember going to a meeting one time, this was in tobacco control days, and a woman stood up and she said, "I know how to defeat the tobacco industry." She said, "Let's make them work in coalitions." So coalitions are not easy. And Mary talked about leadership. Leadership is an art in these coalitions. You can't be out in front saying, "Follow me," and you can't have a leaderless coalition. You got to be somewhere in the leaderful area. And as Mary said, good strategies based on sound research, working upstream and downstream. We've already talked about that. I favor strange bedfellows. The idea in my mind is get everybody at the table. So no permanent opponents, only permanent values, only permanent principles. You need patience and you need a thick skin. I think Harry Truman said it well. He said, if you want a friend, get a dog. And, I still have some hate Christmas cards from a campaign that I worked on. You need to be opportunistic because things aren't always going to go our way. And then I think we need to find common ground with these policymakers. So I want to give an example. I work on serious illness and end-of-life care. And when you go and talk to a policymaker and get her or him to talk first, the first thing they're going to say is, let me tell you about my mother. If you can get to that stage, then you've really created common ground. I think that's really important.
I really love that because I think we forget that relationships exist inside and outside the workplace and in our work, that it's always you're relating with another human being that has a story and has a life. And
yeah,
the one other thing I'd add is that you, and Mary has taught me this, is that you need to be able to define what success looks like in really, really granular terms and get agreement on that. Otherwise there's a sense of I think of the world's not it's not exact. There's tension and there's churn because you're not exactly sure why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm jumping in as if I'm supposed to be I am the moderator here and I'm going back to my role.
Actually, you're a fellow capper. We do know that.
So, Bill, a successful advocacy campaign, one of the hard and rocky ones, but one that you feel was successful. Give us an example.
Well, I want to give two.
Awesome.
So, if I may, and then one that's not where it should be. One is getting prescription drugs into Medicare. So this was when I was at AARP. We tried for 20 years to get prescription drugs into Medicare. And then all of a sudden, very opportunistically, we had presidential support. We had Bush 43 supporting this for his own reasons. We were nonpartisan, which I think you want to be, but we were, I guess you could say courage or full-heartedness or whatever you want, but we were willing to buck both parties. We had very strong public opinion, which we kept trying to feed and encourage. And we made a major investment. That would be great if you can do that. We made major investments in lobbying and communications and in grassroots support. And another one, I think everybody would agree with this one, which is tobacco. So we had the advantage, that sounds strange to say, but we had the perverse advantage of a national crisis. Kid smoking was at an all-time high. People cared, they really cared. We had a broad coalition, which we took pains to build. And we had an opponent that people could get mad at, the tobacco industry. And I always like to say, who can we get mad at when we plan these campaigns? We had good communication. We had a strategy that I love, and I've always thought was a strong one, which is youth advocacy. Kids are fearless. Kids will lobby anybody. And we had patience. And then, Ellie, one that's right now that I'm working on, serious illness and end of life. And I think some of our participants today are involved in that. We've got the demographic trends in terms of population aging and caregiving. Everybody's going to be a caregiver in some way. We've got a strong coalition, but we don't have enough resources. We are seriously under-resourced. And we keep fighting that and fighting it and fighting it. And we'll get this done, but it's not been easy. So those are two successful ones and one that I think is a struggle.
I think, I'm sorry, Mary.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, Bill, a question about the end of life challenge, which I know you've been working on, and that it's deeply held value for you and for many of us to make something happen. Who are we mad at when we're talking about that?
That's a terrific question. We've asked ourselves that many times. And the answer is we don't have an opponent.
Yeah.
People say, well, we should be angry at death. Well, no, that's not going to work. We've done some good research on this, and the answer is we don't have anybody to get mad at.
I think that's, as I think about the challenges in the research for health, and which overlaps with what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
You know, just a time in life.
Yeah.
That's challenging for research all along the course of life, and for our kind of advocacy we do at Research America. Getting angry, you know, who are we going to get angry at? We can get angry at, without getting mad at an entity, you can get angry that we're not making enough progress as we'd like, which is a version of what you're saying.
Yeah, it is.
But being angry at members of Congress, either party, is not a useful approach. So I think that's a wise observation that is worth thinking through some more. I mean, it made me think about that more already, just sitting here. You can be frustrated.
That's what I think, is that if you think about the patient community,
Yeah.
and who are they angry at? They're angry at a situation they can't control that's causing suffering. And I think it's a similar thing here.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's all of us. So how do you find the funder for something that affects all of us? It's like we all have to chip in some way. It's really,
We're still not clear who's the bad guy.
right. Yeah, it's a thing. It's actually a feeling that's the bad guy.
Yeah. Well, many of us know Harvey Feinberg, who was at the National Academy of Medicine, now at the Moore Foundation. So one time Harvey said to me, he said, you know, the perfect donor for that program, that campaign, is a Goldman Sachs executive whose mother had a bad death. And I said, thank you, Harvey. Now help me find that person.
Oh, man. You know, but it seems like we've all been through it. But anyway, I've got so little of your time and we have so many things to learn here. Can we switch to the return on research and why it can be so challenging to convey? And I'm not saying that there hasn't been success. NIH is a very richly funded and needs more money funded agency. There's bipartisan support. But it's fragile. For all of our science agencies, support is fragile. Why is it so hard to get to the kind of iterative, multi-generational benefits of science, technology, research?
So we're assuming something here. I just want to make sure, so that in the big picture of advocacy campaigns of all kinds and activities, that is sometimes a pushback. Is that
I'm saying if the campaign is specifically for increasing support for public and private sector driven medical progress, let's say,
right,
and research driven, R&D driven medical progress, you know, there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of not caring. There's a lot of dismissiveness. And why is that?
So, okay, I just wanted to clarify that that's what we're talking about here, is that how.
Yes, I wasn't very clear. I'm for sure.
I want to get inside your head a little bit. So what's the answer to the pushback questions, of which that is classical, I think. So part of the answer I would give is that this is America, we take progress for granted. We always want it to go faster. And we perceive that when I say we, I'm talking about public opinion surveys that show this. I mean, this is reality. Plus, we all live in the world. So, you know, we know this wisdom. We take progress for granted, and that includes our policymakers taking progress for granted. And we aren't happy when it doesn't happen fast, very fast. And you already cited, you know, the patient groups rightly, and we're all patients, want progress faster. faster, faster, faster. So if we were thinking about that and we want all these good things to happen, then because Bill's right, it's useful to try to, if you're trying to make cognitive sense of all this, who are you going to blame? Well, maybe all those people who are doing the research aren't doing it right, or they're not making fast enough progress. So are they the people we should be angry at? No, and no, that isn't,
Right.
that's not a useful target of our anger. What we need to do is empower them to move faster. So how do you empower them? Good policies, more money, often, not always, better coordination. That's how you empower them to succeed, right? I think there's a way to go back, to have that conversation. And depending on who you're talking to, and a lot of this goes to listen to that question carefully, get more information about it. There is data that shows that there's a tail after one or another new, whether it's a discovery or a new medication or whatever, that it turns out there's a long prehistory to how did that come about before it got into the marketplace, shall we say.
Right.
And actually, the COVID vaccines are excellent example. The RNAi technology, it's been worked on for decades with public funding and some private funding. And then it was there to tap when we needed it. Right.
Right.
So you can tell anecdotes like that.
That's good. That's good advice. Like
A lot of people-
anecdotal.
But you got to know who you're talking to. Who's your audience is another piece, of course, that Bill would.
Right. And what enemy are you fighting? We go back to that.
Yeah.
Bill, what are your thoughts on effective advocacy for the process behind medical progress, or is it just effective advocacy for medical progress itself?
Well, I think Research America is the ranking expert, so I defer to you guys. But what I've been thinking about is, how do you communicate the value of science?
Right, exactly.
I think that the public does respect science. I mean, your own research shows that, but they're vague about it. They don't really understand it. They don't know scientists or what they do. And Mary and I were talking about a qualitative study we saw one time, where one of the key questions was, well, what do you want to know about science? One of the big answers was, well, are there space aliens? So, people don't really understand it. The public thinks of science as uncertain. When do I mask up? What are they telling me about masking? Is coffee good for me? Is coffee bad for me?
Right.
They read conflicting things and they say, well, what the hell? And then there's all this misinformation and disinformation that's rampant and is growing. And I do think artificial intelligence is going to make it worse. And then the last thing is, everything today is controversial. Politicians are going after NIH, after CDC, after key figures. If you add all this up, it's really hard to convey the value of science.
So do you have, I know this is a rough one, but does the science community itself play generally a positive or negative role in addressing the fact that what may be advice today is not advice tomorrow, both of them science-based?
Yeah.
Eggs, coffee, red wine.
I defer to Mary on that one.
Well, I don't know that you need to defer, but I suspect we agree that the science community has for way too long failed to convey that science is a process. It's not a set of facts. It's not immutable. There are a few things, gravity is one example that's often cited, that are, there's no doubt about it. But actually, there's doubts about quite a lot of science. Scientists are trained to be skeptical. It's a value in science. But for some reason, scientists aren't so happy to hear skepticism from non-scientists. Whereas I actually think that's a point of connection.
Right.
When someone who doesn't happen to be science trained raises a question like, what am I supposed to believe? Well, that's the point at which you say, wow, you are thinking like a scientist. That's exactly how I was trained, to
Right.
be skeptical. And the truth is, what we know has emerged over time, and it will continue to change. We'll learn more. I mean, I'm not proud of this, but it was at the time what people, the best and the brightest scientists thought. In the 1970s, I was hired as part of a big NIH-funded clinical trial, primary prevention trial, and I helped train our recruiters to volunteers, please join this trial, help train them to say that everything we learn about men in this trial that's restricted to men will be applicable to women. What? That actually was the state of perceived wisdom
Unbelievable.
at the time. It was nuts,
Right.
absolutely crazy. And yet I said that, I at some level believed it. Thank God, that's changed. Another example, not from personal experience, although I was around for it, is that the idea that you could, in an airplane, in a contained space, have a smoking section and a non-smoking section.
Right. Right.
Ludicrous.
Right.
It's ludicrous. And it was Senator Durbin that finally called the end to that
Right.
ridiculousness. But science has to recognize, the science enterprise has to recognize that it's often wrong before it's right. It's just the way it is.
Right.
It's a process, and skepticism is okay. Now, gets really complicated in terms of who's doing the talking. I'm a big believer personally in scientists themselves as the secret sauce that's been undercooked to continue. I'm not a cook, so I'll botch trying to carry through with that analogy. But people, Bill's right, people say they trust science. They don't necessarily know what that means. They trust the science that works for them. They trust the science, if you will, the technology that allows you to drive an electric vehicle or a gas-powered engine.
Right.
Test that without needing to know anything about how it works. Anything. You can take medications the same way. You don't need to know how it works biologically. You're trusting it. It's a product of science. Scientists themselves, we know from our surveys and just life experience, people don't know scientists. They're invisible in the world, and often scientists like it that way. But I think that's a horribly, it's very unfortunate and a missed opportunity. If scientists become comfortable with, and that's not hard to do actually, identifying as a scientist and engaging people, we can do a lot to advance the value of science. If you actually know who it is that you're angry at,
Yeah.
it's harder to be angry. And then finally, there's the institutions of science. And we're going through, arguably, we've seen a lot of signs of this in this nation, where we're collectively as a culture angry at institutions. Right? And that's a problem. Institutions can seem pretty remote from the people who don't live and work within them. And that's another level of challenge. But it's the individuals, I think, who are the answer. They're the unrealized resource that we could do so much more with.
Makes so much sense. For me, things that are unknown or that I might fail at, it's very hard for me to get myself to do it, right? So how does a scientist or a patient, or the mom of a patient, the dad of a patient, the dads of a patient, can they contact their member of Congress and get anywhere with that? You know, can a scientist actually be a resource to an office, or is that much more of a kind of a, it should be that way, but in fact, it's not possible to do? What do you think, Bill? Is individual advocacy a thing?
Well, if we're talking about the parent of a child who's ill, if we're talking about somebody whose spouse needs some help, then people are going to fight fiercely, and they should. But if we think in broader terms, you know, what can one person do for advocacy per se?
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest three things. One is we can invest in a cause, invest in a candidate. And, Henry David Thoreau said something really great. He said, if you give money to a cause, spend yourself with it. So in other words, be involved, join. You can join at the community level, at the state level, at the national level. It's really satisfying. Use your skills. Everybody has skills. And I think we can make a difference.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, of course, is, you can do this from your living room, which is communicate. Everything from letters to the editor. You know, I'm out here in Missoula, Montana. I love the Daily Missoulian. The letters to the editor are great. You can contact your elected officials. Be part of an advocacy network. You know, AARP has a huge advocacy network. And when those people want to, they can flood Congress. They can flood, Albany or Sacramento. Be part of an advocacy network. So I think there's a lot that an individual can do.
Yeah,
Boy, do I agree with that. And I know sometimes when I'm talking to a scientific audience, we go through something called the Starbucks test. And so you're in your local coffee emporium and your member of Congress is there in the same errand. So raise your hand if you recognize that person by sight. Recognize. Yeah. Very few people in a science audience will raise their hand. And yet, that member of Congress is talking to everybody in the place. A lot of people know who that member of Congress is on site. And that member of, the second question is, now those of you who've raised your hands, keep them there if the member of Congress recognizes you. Right. A lot of hands come down, even of those three that were up saying they recognize the member, hands come down. So what's the moral of that story? It's that there's a lot of other people in Starbucks or wherever you are in the community of the congressperson who is elected and has every interest in talking to the voters, of which you are one. And if you're not a voter because you don't happen to be a US citizen, you're a constituent, nonetheless, a constituent of this member of Congress, but they don't know you. They don't know what you are doing to serve the public's interest. That's where we're missing. So easy to approach an elected official and say, thank you for your service. Congresswoman, what if you're wrong? And you're talking to Ellie Mahoney, it's not Congresswoman, fill in the blank. I don't want to, confuse anyone. And you're going to say, whoa, I'm not your member of Congress, no harm, no foul, but that's kind of cool.
Make new friend.
Be afraid of doing something like that.
Yeah.
And then you tell them that you also serve the public's interest, and that member of Congress is going to say, tell me how you do that.
Yep.
Now you are an advocate.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add is that there are ways to engage in advocacy and causes, whether it's during the elections or not. You're not going to go to heaven any faster by doing something that's going to give you PTSD. Like if the leaving hangers by doors just sounds to you like the most scary thing in the world, don't do that. Stuff letters.
Yeah.
You're still going to be doing something to help. So, and one other piece of advice is when you contact a member of Congress, and you can do that through any portal, if you're a constituent, you can do it through your senators' portals, your representatives' portals. In the notes, say, could you refer me to the staffer who's working on research or health? Form the relationship with the staffer. And that's the beginning of really having impact. So, hey, there are questions. And Jacqueline, I don't know if you want to join us or you want me to field them. Yeah, why don't you join us?
Or let me
Excellent.
spotlight myself. Thank you all for this fabulous discussion about science communication and advocacy for all of us advocates. So we'll go to the first question from the audience. If there's not any real opponent to addressing an advocacy issue, is it really just inertia that is what needs to be overcome?
Interesting.
That sounds like, the good guy campaigns, in a way, Bill, that's what your end of life campaign's about. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that there is inertia in so many different areas. One example, I think, is in climate action. So 5 years ago, 3 years ago, there were so many climate deniers, climate doubters. Not all of these people were politically against climate. They just had inertia. They didn't understand it. They didn't know it. They didn't care about it. And slowly that has been overcome. But sometimes you have to overcome inertia in a very aggressive, very proactive way. As Mary and Ellie were saying, there's not always somebody to get mad at. So yes, inertia or misunderstanding, there's lots of different things. And that's why consumer and, audience research is so important.
Yeah. I noticed in the chat that Ayman El-Mohandes has weighed in to say that it's also conflicting priorities sometimes going on. And Ayman, you might want to talk about that, bring that point in if you like, or we can speculate the implications of that. I think you're right, Bill, that that's where research and learning about what else is going on for people. Why can't we raise our issue, whatever our advocacy goal is, to a higher level of priority? There are other things going on for individuals and for policymakers as well.
And I love that you use the word conflicting priorities, because it gets to the fact that too often we say somebody's right and somebody's wrong. For instance, in the climate debate, when in fact, the big concern was ideological differences about the solutions. And so we had such a tendency to say, you're just refused to look at the science, when actually it was the folks that are presenting the science are also very happy with big government solutions, and that scared the bejeebers out of someone with a different ideology. So I love the language you use, Ayman. And do you want us to unmute you? I don't know if we or you.
Yeah, I've just been unmuted.
Good.
Hi there. What a wonderful conversation today. I think also it's the way we present an issue. In my feeble or limited efforts of advocacy for science, I noted that the issue of cost efficacy and cost effectiveness of scientific solutions dealing with issues, be they health issues, environmental issues, are very, very important in the way we present the case. And sometimes we present the problem, we suggest solutions, but we sometimes are lacking in presenting cost efficacy and cost efficiency of these solutions.
That's
And
terrific.
so we really need to bring economists to be friends of scientists in our advocacy role. That's all I wanted to say. I'm going to mute myself again. Thank you for a very, very excellent.
That's such a compelling point, because we have to get to the right messaging, and that means evidence-based messaging, right? We're in the science community. Other questions?
Yes, I will go to the next question. This is about scientific literacy. So It's a bit long, so I'll read it. Educating the public on scientific literacy and expectations for science seems like an important need. The example of COVID and vaccines seems to demonstrate that in that far too many people don't understand the purpose of vaccines and prevention and reduction of symptoms and seriousness of illness, and not as a bulletproof shield. How much do we need to focus on better informing and educating the broader public in order to have support?
One question.
We'll take a stab at some of that anyway. I think it's very tempting to bemoan the lack of literacy of people who aren't science, about science, by people who aren't science trained. But in addition to strengthening education, literally, the K-12 education. And by the way, one way for scientists to get involved in that is to get elected to a school board or support other people who will be elected to a school board. That's sometimes people forget that that's where a lot of the action is on improving K-12 education. But okay, so we have scientific literacy, but rather than even getting close to blaming people for what they don't know, how about finding ways to help them learn what they want to know when they want to know it? It's a kind of just-in-time model. And that depends on where you're going to go, learning more about who to go to, whether it's on the internet, what's your source, and individuals. And if I get back to the point I made earlier, but if scientists are invisible, then how would anyone know to go to them? And to Bill's point about how AI might make this more complicated, but let's figure out how to make it work for us. Let's figure out how to drive what I think we're talking about too, is trust in science and sources of scientific information by making it easier to access, number one, and not about what you know and what you don't know and what you hated. What might be ringing in your head is, boy, I really hated high school biology or something like that. You don't want to trigger any of that, whether it's true or false or whatever. You want to be tapping into, how can I help you solve your problem now? That's what I do in science.
I'm against the term literacy. Maybe we can use it in a back room.
Okay.
But when we think about science literacy, health literacy, it's like we're going to act on an audience, as Mary just said. We're going to teach you the capital of every state in the country. I think what we need is understand what they know, what they want to know, and then really be really good at strategic storytelling with the right messengers.
It's brilliant. Write that down.
I think that's really well put. And this is not attacking of the person who asked a very important question, because it's fundamental, is that if we're not understanding each other as we talk, then we're not going to get very far in advocacy, whether we're the ones that don't know something or they're the ones who don't know something, and they and we. But I do think the science community has to remember something, and that is that the science community trends far more in one direction ideologically than the nation as a whole. And it's very hard to disentangle, for all of us, our ideology, our way of looking at the world, from issues of policy and issues of science that are societally important, and they typically are some compromise of ideologies. And so when we're engaging, we've really got to keep that in mind, that we've got to consider that we are looking from one point of view typically, or not, I mean, we have differences, but we trend liberal in the science community. So do we have other questions? Of course, I have a million, and I don't even know how long we have you all. Did we promise 45 minutes?
We're set for an hour.
Oh,
We do have time. And I have one more question here.
Great.
It would likely help if we have more connectors to the public, like Alan Alda just did with his MASH boots. For context, Alda auctioned his boots and the proceeds of the auction are going to his Communicating Science Foundation. Can you
Neat.
think of any other instances where we can get the public somewhat interested in science? And do you have any other ideas like this that you think would be effective?
Great question.
Well, Alan just keeps going from high to high, as far as I can tell, in his commitment on behalf of science in the public. But I also think that there's something for everybody to do. I don't think it's the answer here is necessarily more Alan Alda's, although we welcome those. Groups like Hip Hop Public Health in New York City, and other kinds of groups like that who are finding new ways to connect to audiences that aren't thinking about science or public health. I'm all for that. But I think that it goes back to my strongly held view that there's something for each of us to do, and it might be in our own families. I have never, Ellie, your good point about different ideologies. I don't think I've ever had a conversation about more or less around this topic with a member of the science trained community where it didn't raise the point that there's somebody in their household, either their literal household or their broader family with whom they strongly disagree. Maybe about vaccines,
Yeah,
maybe about something else,
Yeah.
that is at essence a political ideology question. Okay,
well,
you can work with, you can learn from that.
Right.
Be helpful.
Jacqueline, excuse me, go ahead, Mary, sorry.
I'm done.
I was going to say, Jacqueline, I like celebrities. So when you think about messengers,
Mhm.
usually there's three kinds. There can be others as well. One kind is experts. So physicians, scientists, people who are expert in the field. The second kind oftentimes is people who are like the target audience. Jane or Joe, America, people who are like the target audience. And a third kind oftentimes is celebrities. The Alan Alda example, UNICEF for years has had a spokesperson,
Right.
but they have to be the right kind of celebrity or the right celebrity for the job. And even the celebrity can be fictional. So when I was heading up the campaign for tobacco-free kids, I went to Gary Trudeau and I said to him, I want you to license to me for free your Mr. Butts character. And he did it. And we used Mr. Butts for years.
I love it.
So I think celebrities are important. They just have to be the right ones.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the social media influencer thing,
Yeah.
I'd love to see one who it just is, what are you talking about? Like when you say pandemic preparedness, what are we prepared? I don't get it. Like, that's a pretty big word. I'd love to see somebody who just asks these questions of us all, very cool question. And are we any more in the chat before we?
Yeah. We have another one. You mentioned the importance of selecting specific metrics and goals from the outset. Could you give an example of the metrics and goals chosen for an advocacy campaign you have run?
Great question. Do you want to start on that one, Bill?
Well, I'm looking for my notes here. The truth of the matter is that advocacy campaigns are really hard to measure. And too oftentimes we get hung up on attribution. We contributed to, or we made this happen. We made this bill pass. We got all this funding for XYZ agency. We get hung up on attribution. And oftentimes, since we're dealing with something that's so long range, you can't always pin it down to metrics. If you're trying to change something at the federal level, at the state level, trying to change public attitudes. And oftentimes what you have to do is be qualitative and say to yourself, how are we doing? How is our leadership doing? Are we preparing for the future? So I'm all for metrics, but I think we have to be I think we have to be smart about it and not just try for something that's hard to find.
Totally, boy, I like the way you describe that, Bill. And to me, there's some kinds of campaigns have specific metrics. Doubling the NIH budget in 5 years is a very specific metric. And some other things that involve funding or passing a bill, or a new policy, very specific. Let's have a checkbox on your driver's license if you want to be an organ donor. Okay. So it was very clear what the organizers of that campaign wanted to make happen. So there are some things that lend themselves to that, but by and large, they don't. To your point, it's long time period. People get discouraged during that. Sometimes there's that attribution problem that you identified. But progress, which can be just like science, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. It's a process, right?
Yeah.
It's a process.
Right. And I'd say a really important metric in advocacy is, did I get past inertia? Did I form a relationship with a congressional staffer? Did I submit comments when NIH asked? Because there are long-term payoffs that are almost certain that you are going to affect a cause because you've formed a relationship, and when the time comes, you can provide input to that staffer, and they'll trust you. You'll be invited to a listening session at NIH, or you'll be on the list for an advisory committee. So did you take action to be part of the conversation? You just met a really important metric. So I just add that.
Great, a lot of great points from all of you. Here's another question. This was pre-submitted. If you are advocating from a relatively small professional organization, what can it look like? / what can we do effectively?
So I'd say join an alliance and add your expertise and that of your members to something that's bigger than you, and help grow that alliance. I think that was like the first point you made in our conversation, Bill.
Right, and influence that alliance.
Power of
Yeah.
alliances and working together. Yes, make it smarter. Make
it smarter. Give your input.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Don't do it yourself. Join an alliance, as Mary and Ellie said. And you can make it smarter. You can bring something to the table.
No question.
Oh, we have one more. I received a response from my representative about a bill saying it was like another bill proposed earlier. Do I keep pushing it and sending my letters?
I think that it takes time. So when I was at AARP, I used to say, we need to ask the third question. So let's say you're at a town hall meeting, or you've written a letter, or you're visiting with a member, and you ask the first question. You're almost always going to get a soundbite, a 9-second soundbite. And that may be what that letter writer got. So you got to ask that second question. And it may not be you, it may be your colleague with you. And the second question is going to get a longer answer, maybe a whole minute. Ask the third question, really, really, really dig down deeper. And oftentimes what will happen is, that legislator or that official will go back to staff and say, hey, I need more information on this. And that's a win.
It's a win.
If that letter came back as a form letter from something that you submitted to the portal, again, your next letter to that portal is, I was just thrilled that you were willing to get back to me. Could I be referred to the staff or that's working on this? I think I have a couple of thoughts to share or something. But as Bill said, third question, and also thank them for what they did in responding. start a relationship.
Right.
Hmm.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. How do we attract new entrepreneurs from individuals in lower and middle income countries who may contribute in research and development to tackle present challenges of the globe?
Cool.
Well, luckily Bill is in charge of that. Business for impact. No, really, truly, Bill, you got some.
Well, yeah, I think that is a really critical need and a really important strategy. So I'm thinking about, I used to be with CARE, and CARE works across the world on women's empowerment. As Mary said, our Business for Impact Center at Georgetown, right now we're working in Jordan on a project just like that. We don't spend enough of our time and our energy doing that. And we say to ourselves, well, that's not necessarily going to pay off in the short term, but it is going to pay off in the long term. And a survey that we just did for Science and Technology Action Committee showed that the public really thinks that science and technology is going to help America when America is strong in science and technology, but it's also going to help the rest of the world. We have to be awake to that.
Absolutely. And if you'd like to follow up with me, my email is in the chat. We can see if there are ways that we, organizations to connect you to. Very, very glad to help. Terrific question. Well, we are just winding down, and you're lucky because I could keep you here all afternoon, and but it's lunchtime. So I just want to thank you, Bill, and thank you, Mary, so much for this really fun and I think productive conversation, and for Iman and others in our audience who have contributed. Really, really appreciate it. I think we have a bit of housekeeping again, Jay, to go through. Bill and Mary, you don't stick with us or not. We just have to tell some things about additional alliance discussions, etc. So, but
Okay, I'm going to sign off by thanking Research America and thanking everybody for tuning in.
so appreciate you.
Thank you, Bill. And thanks, Mary. Thanks also to the audience for participating and tuning in. I just dropped the link in the chat to register. And we hope you can join us next week, August 2nd. Can't believe it's August already, at 11 a.m. Eastern for a candid conversation with Dr. John Lorsch. He's the director of the National Institute of General Medical Sciences at the NIH. We've asked Dr. Lorsch to provide an update on the Institute's role in bringing about a more sustainable and inclusive career path for early career researchers across medical and health research engineering disciplines. We hope you'll bring your questions and lend your input and insights for this important discussion. So thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, all.